And we're going to talk about college football and the Ivy League decision come today and what it means. But first, let me welcome in Bruce. What's going on, man? Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for the kind words. It's good to talk to you.
Hey, so let's get into it then. The Ivy League today. You and Nicole Auerbach had a great piece the other day where you wrote about the Ivy League's impending decision and potential ripple effects on college football as a whole. What is the Ivy League deciding today?
Well, from everything we've heard from coaches, they expect it to be pushed back to spring. That football, again, and it's worth noting, as we mentioned in the piece, Ivy League football is not a revenue sport to them. They do not partake in any postseason anyway. But a lot of their coaches we've spoke to expect college football to not happen for them in the fall, and the decision would be that they were going to try to plan as if they're going to play in the spring. Now, from what I've been told earlier today is, I guess they expect the decision to be announced late this afternoon. So
Okay.
we'll see where it goes. And part of what our story was about on The Athletic on Monday was really when I first heard this late last week. And again, it's going basically on what one of the coaches themselves said was, we're not a revenue sport. We don't play in the postseason. I was like, okay, this is kind of a red herring. This is much different than certainly SEC football or Big Ten football. But then when I brought that up to some other Power Five administrators and said, do you think this has any bearing on the thought process of what you guys will ultimately do? And what I started to hear back was a lot of university presidents really pay close attention to what the Ivy Leagues decide. And just because the Ivy Leagues, I don't want people to get this wrong because I think this has kind of got misconstrued sometimes in the last day or two. Just because the Ivy Leagues may decide, hey, we're holding off till the spring, that doesn't mean everybody else go, okay, we're doing that too. But the part of this was, this is a decision that university presidents will look at and say, you know what, these are people that we really respect, their intel, their thought process. And our story was up for, I don't know, a couple hours, and I got a call from a head coach in the Power Five, and he said, the part that sticks with me in my head is if the Ivy League decides this and they deem it is not safe for our players to play this fall, and we don't think it's the right thing, that could lead to a little bit of an uproar where people are going to say, well, we know that the only reason why you guys are adamant about playing is because you're desperate for the money.
Yeah.
And some people are going to read this as, we don't care about our kids. We're only about money. And that's not good optics for them.
No, I mean, I said at the onset, though, Bruce, I think that this whole situation is going to make people who have maybe been dragging their feet in this regard to acknowledge some harsh truths about the reality of the student athlete. And if you are a major Power 5 football player, especially in a conference like the SEC, you are athlete then student. And I think this fall is going to prove that.
Yeah, and I think the wiggle room on this has always been, well, they're not employees.
Yeah.
And, I think a lot of people, especially when you see it on Twitter, will sit there and go, well, I would do it for free. Well, the reality is most people, no one's going to pay to tune in to watch you do it, play college football. It's like,
you got to be good.
That's much different seeing, Division III football, and it's great and everything, and I'm glad that it exists, but there's a difference between that and what people are packing stadiums, in Death Valley or you name it, to see that. And I think what that argument has always been really hard because it's so unwieldy. Do you pay all college athletes at major programs? Do you pay the track athletes at programs like your alma mater has an amazing track program, but it's not like a revenue sport like college football? Do those athletes get paid? Do the athletes at smaller programs in FBS that maybe aren't making much money as programs, how does that work? So I think because that's been so unwieldy, that conversation is really hard for people to kind of plow through. And I think you're right. I think some of the realities of the economics of this are going to be right in people's faces on it. And I think that's what, maybe will be an eye opener for some people.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a capitalistic approach, right? If you're generating the revenue, you should get a piece of that revenue. But that's not fully the conversation I want to have today. That's for a later date. I do want to ask, though, as we sit here today on this Wednesday, July 8th, what, if you had to guess, what do you think happens with the Power Five? I don't know why. My brain just keeps going back to, if depending on how bad this gets, that maybe you do like a conference only thing. What do you think happens with the P5?
Yeah, from what I've heard, especially in a couple of conferences, that, and we're talking Power Five, that there is a lot more focus on maybe we only go conference only. That way they can have more uniform rules about who is playing, what the protocols are, testing procedures, also how they view attendance and how they're going to handle that. So, I mean, this thing is so fluid, T-Bob. I mean, the thing is, probably, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, I was pretty confident that I was like, oh, we're going to at least have some version of a season this fall. Now, would it be interrupted or who knows? But I think when you started hearing from coaches, but also from ADs, and some of the coaches would have their stories about, man, we're having a hard time keeping our guys from testing positive because not necessarily what happens in the building, but, a bunch of guys go out and get together and play Madden, or guys go out to a pool party or wherever.
Or to Tigerland.
Whatever, yeah. You get spread, and there it is. And they're not even really doing football stuff. I mean, they're, in the small group things, it's not like, I mean, you know what it's like when football actually happens. You can't social distance when you're doing that. And that's a whole different dynamic for them to process. And then I think the other thing that has happened is, some of these ADs on their weekly conference calls and regular conference calls, they're talking to their peers and hearing some of these stories about the outbreaks and how it's happened. And I think that has shaken a lot of them. I talked to one AD in the Big 12 who had told me that he became a lot more pessimistic about midpoint last week after getting off the phone on one of their calls. Yeah. And I think that's a reality that, like, you can see whatever testing numbers. And I think for a lot of this, people can kind of believe what they want to believe because you can find almost anything on your Twitter feed to justify what you think. But when you talk to these people who are working in the middle of it, the ADs, the coaches, the administrators, they're coming to terms with a reality that's staring them in the face, and they're going to know a lot more, they hope, by the end of July to say, okay, are we going to be able to make a run at this normally, or is it something we have to push pause on or audible to something a little different time format?
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see. We're talking to Bruce Feldman here. Catch him on The Athletic, my favorite sports type site, athletic.com/hold that podcast if you want a sign up deal. Bruce, it'd be remiss if I had you here and I asked you kind of an LSU themed question. Have you talked to Coach O lately? Have you seen the rings yet? Have you gotten to talk about the rings with him yet? They just unveiled them last night, and they're pretty.
Yeah, I actually talked to him briefly yesterday for a little bit, just about some book stuff. It's funny. I did see the books because I read your protege Brody Miller's story on how the rings came together, and I thought that was really cool. I didn't, it didn't surprise me you get two. I wouldn't think you'd get three rings, but you always beat as many top 10 teams as they did and had the year they did. It's fitting. I mean, there's parts of that book that we worked on where it came up about, where Ed talked about how much ownership he gave Joe Burrow, and some of the things that the players decided, hey, we're not celebrating that because that isn't the goal. The goal isn't the Magnolia Bowl or whatever those things. And so to hear that this was such a building process to okay, that wasn't important. That wasn't important. And then once they're getting to it, and then to see this, I'm like, I can only imagine how impactful that is for those guys who are part of that. Just because I saw the last, whenever the last month of that run, and to see how many pieces like literally had to come together for it to work. It's really cool. And so I think with Ed, he's just, I think he's so focused on, hey, if we're going to play, we got to, this is what I'm excited about, and you can only control what you can control. But I think probably in the times where you're sitting in the car and all those things, I think you can really appreciate, hey, what they did. Because, look, I go back to the night before the national title game. He's given the team, his final big speech, and listening to him talk about, this is going to probably be the greatest day of, you're going to remember this when you're 65 years old,
Wow.
Kind of stories. And I think that's why that stuff is so powerful.
Man. That's, yeah. Oh, so Bruce, for anybody listening that may not know about the book, go ahead and plug it here on the way out.
Yeah. So it's Flip the Script. It's a book that I worked on with Ed Orgeron. It's really his story, and really the way I viewed it. And I know I told you guys a couple of weeks ago when we talked about this, but really to me, it is kind of the sequel to Meat Market, the book I did about him back when he was trying, to uplift Ole Miss, and all the changes he's made and all the growth that he's made. And I think we just we're still in the final editing processes of the book, but just going to see the last parts of it. I mean, I feel like there's so much stuff in there that I never knew, and I'm somebody who read everything there was to read about that LSU team and at Orgeron, just to hear from the inside, hear from also other players are mentioned in it. I mean, there's an amazing Darius Geist story. There's an amazing story about Joe Burrow that gets told. There's a lot of just great behind-the-scenes stuff, so I'm really excited about the book.
Hell yeah, check it out. Flip the Script. Bruce Feldman does excellent work for The Athletic, embedded himself in LSU. Bruce, thanks so much for stopping by this morning, man.
Always a pleasure, my man. Take care.
All right, take it easy, Bruce. And he's written plenty of great books you've probably heard of. Meat Market being a famous one, in which he chronicles me getting my ass kicked by Drake Nevis at an Ole Miss camp. I think I cried, which was embarrassing. Yeah, there were a lot of people there. Wow.